What is up, everybody? Dave Schmittou here. It has been a while since I have gone live here on the Teach Better Teams feed, but I'm excited to be able to talk and share with you all just a little bit. So sit tight. In about 30 seconds, I'll let you know why I'm here, what I'm talking about, and I hope that you'll join the conversation. So what's up, everybody? Dave Schmittou here, the Director of Leadership and Development with the Teach Better team. Getting to connect with you a little bit today, in part because of a partnership that we have here at the Teach Better team with really the entire state of Ohio, it seems like. Here at the Teach Better team, we've partnered with 16 ESCs in the state of Ohio. An ESC is basically a county-wide consortium of school districts. We were able to secure a grant alongside those 16 ESCs to service the schools, the districts, the staff through professional learning throughout the course of the 2022-23 school year. And it has been an absolute blast to be able to work with the leaders, the teachers, everybody throughout the state of Ohio that's been a part of this partnership. And as a result of that work, we have committed to at least once a month coming on here, going live, sharing some of the highlights of the work that we're doing, and just give you a couple of nuggets, some quick tips to celebrate the work and the progress of all the amazing educators in the state of Ohio. And today, I get the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been able to take part in the state of Ohio. It's been an absolute blast as we dive in and really get to explore and celebrate the amazing educators that are doing the right work for the right reasons. But as we all know, it can get extremely overwhelming. It can be extremely overwhelming to be an educator these days, feeling like it's never enough, feeling like somebody is always chasing the next best thing. You know, I've been in education now for 25 years. And I can tell you that pendulum, and it swings all the time. Those of us that have been in education for a while, we know what I'm talking about, where every few years it feels like there's a new initiative that comes on in. Everybody goes all in. We throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then we chase the next shiny thing the next year. And then the next year, something new comes in. And eventually, if we've been in this long enough, we are able to see the same ideas recycled year in and year out. So one of the things that we're doing with our partnership with, again, these 16 ESCs, truly impacting and working with thousands of educators all throughout Ohio, is celebrating the amazing work that they're already doing and allowing ourselves to just dig into the trenches and, to use a Schmittouism, focus on the focus and celebrate the good work that's already being done and build around it. Because if you are an educator today, I need you to know first and foremost, you are doing the right work for the right reasons. You don't always have to chase the next shiny object. You don't necessarily need to listen to the guy with the microphone or the guy going live, the guy that has created a PowerPoint presentation, the person that has written a book, because seemingly today everybody's doing that. We need to be able to be true to our priorities and identify the things that matter most. And in my time working with all of these educators across the state of Ohio, I've had the opportunity to do that in part, just sit down with people and celebrate who they are and what they're doing, but also help them refine their basics. And by basics, I don't mean going back and looking at the basic tenets of education, whether it's phonics or whole language, or looking at, do we need to teach cursive or not teach cursive? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about truly simplifying what it means to be a teacher. It seems like year in and year out, we're just piling initiative after initiative after initiative on our backs. And we know that that can create initiative fatigue, where we just get exhausted, where we get burnt out. So we're trying to double down and say, what are the real essential things in education that we need to be focusing on? What are those things that we know make an impact? And how do we build around those? So let me just celebrate real quickly some of the work that we've been doing. Let me share some of the highlights of the work that we're doing and walk you through some of these little nuggets that I've been able to celebrate with educators. First, I want to build around this quote by Lao Tzu, who says, "To attain knowledge, add things every day. But to obtain wisdom, subtract things every day." I want you to hear that, and I want you to resonate on it because I think it's extremely important. In order to obtain wisdom, sometimes we need to subtract. Sometimes we need to take things off of our plate and say, let's just double down on the things that matter most. But how do we do that? How do we do that in education? How do we identify those things that truly matter most? If you are a classroom teacher where you might have 30 kids an hour, or 30 kids all day, or middle school or high school teacher where you've got 150 kids a day, where you are expected to teach standard after standard after standard, where you're expected to give assessment after assessment, you got lots of data points. How do you identify those most important things? Well, there's lots of ways to do it. And I'm going to walk you through a few examples that we've been able to celebrate using our educators in Ohio to be able to get them to wrap around the things that matter most. First thing I want to celebrate, or I want to talk through, is this chart. A lot of us have seen this chart before. It's a chart that illustrates some of the work, some of the research done by John Hattie, that researcher from New Zealand who did a huge meta-analysis about 15, 20 years ago, where he identified all of the things that impact student learning. And he came up with a chart that rates things by their effect size. In essence, which things have a greater impact on student learning. And he rank ordered them for us. What we know is that 95% of the things that we do in our classrooms work, but there are some things that work better or have a stronger impact. Today, I'm going to highlight a few of the things that I have green arrows next to. The first thing I want to point out, the thing that has the single greatest impact on student learning, according to the research of John Hattie and others over the last 15 years, it's been proven time and time again, is this concept known as collective teacher efficacy. Collective teacher efficacy matters more than anything else. Collective teacher efficacy does not mean every teacher doing things the same way. It does not mean every teacher giving the same test every single Friday so that you can compare teacher results. Collective teacher efficacy is not the same thing as that dirty F word of fidelity that we use in schools. What is collective teacher efficacy? Well, let me talk about it through self-efficacy as my example. See, I'm a dad. I've got 4 kids, and I want my kids to all grow up and be self-efficacious, which means I want them to be reliant on themselves. When their car breaks down or they get a flat tire, I want them to be able to try to diagnose it, fix it, and change the spare tire. When they go get gas at the gas pump, I want them to be able to pump their own gas. When they go to a restaurant, I want them to be able to figure out what's on the menu and order it. I want them to be self-reliant, self-efficacious. The single greatest factor for student learning in schools today is collective teacher efficacy, which means teachers being able to rely on other teachers, teachers being able to make strategic decisions that matter more for their kids in their classroom. Not necessarily being compliant and following the rules and doing everything that I as a leader might ask them, but teachers having the power and the ability to stand up for themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can encourage that, celebrate that, and really capitalize on it because it matters for student learning. Also going to talk about how to have clear student expectations, how to make sure that there is teacher clarity, how to provide quality feedback, and how to increase verbalization and questioning in the classroom. Again, around the work that I get to do with schools day in and day out, this is the work that we build on because this is the work that matters more. When we focus on these things that have strong impacts and strong effect sizes on kids, we know that student learning is a direct result. So how do we do it? Well, again, there are lots of approaches to this. Now, let me unpack this really quickly by talking about some of the work that I've done before my time on the Teach Better team. Right now, as the director of leadership and development, I get the opportunity to talk to leaders all over the place. And I also get to develop the training that we have within the Teach Better team. Well, prior to that time, I've had multiple roles. I have been a classroom teacher. I've been a building administrator. I've been a district administrator. I've also been a college professor. And throughout all of that time, I've had the ability to go do a lot of research, to go out and do a lot of studying. One of the things that I've been intrigued by over the last 10 years or so was the notion, some of you might be able to relate to this. At the end of the year, you give that big, scary state test. Results come in June, July, August. You look at your results, and some of you might relate to this. You look at them and you're kind of devastated. You're confused. You say, I don't understand. I taught this stuff. How come my kids didn't demonstrate mastery? How come my kids didn't demonstrate that they know this? I know I taught this. What's going on? And some of us, we blame the test. We blame the system. We blame a bunch of other things. But we look at it and we say, I don't get it. So one of the things that I've built a lot of my research interest around was around that notion of teachers say that they taught it. The test doesn't show it. Are teachers really teaching it? And in recent years, I had the opportunity to go study a couple of thousand classrooms around the Midwest in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and truly identify, are we really teaching that stuff that we say that we're teaching? And here's what I found out. Super interesting. Do you realize that when we focus on the standards, the K-12 standards, 83% of the standards, 83% of the standards from kindergarten through 12th grade are written at a level of application or above, according to Bloom's taxonomy. Meaning we're asking kids to do something, to apply their knowledge, to analyze information, to synthesize, to create, to evaluate. However, what I have seen from time in classrooms is that 76% of classroom assessment and the associated instruction is at the understanding or recall / remembering level. Which means we're teaching the stuff, but we're not necessarily teaching it to the right depth. We're asking kids to memorize a bunch of stuff when the standards are asking kids to do a bunch of stuff. The assessments, those big, scary assessments that we give in April and May every year, have questions or problems that are asking kids to apply and analyze, and our kids don't know how to do it because we've been teaching them how to recall and understand. So yes, we're teaching our stuff, but we're not teaching it to the right depth. So how do we get ourselves to the place where we're able to teach the right stuff to the right depth with the finite amount of time, energy, resources that we have, added to it with all of the other initiatives, suggestions, and strategies presented before us? Well, over the last 10 years or so, we've developed the roadmap that helps us understand this. In a lot of schools that I've had the opportunity to go into, and other members of the Teach Better team have had the opportunity to go into, we're asked to share strategies, standards-based grading, standards-aligned learning, standards-based assessment. In essence, making sure that we're teaching the standards according to the standards. A very Schmittouism statement, a very Schmittou-esque statement is a standard is only standard if it's standard. Well, using the logic that I just showed you, we just saw that oftentimes the standards that we're teaching aren't necessarily the standards. Right content, different level of depth. So one of the things that we do is we present schools and districts across Ohio and really across the country and across the world now with this roadmap to say, if you want to get to the place where you're assessing students according to the standards, where you're giving grades according to the standards, where you're providing instruction according to the standards, we encourage people to follow the roadmap. The roadmap is a step-by-step guide that tells you what to do, when to do it, and then with our time with ESEs, we unpack how to do it. Today, I'm going to give you a little glimpse into step 1, the concept of identifying power standards, essential standards, priority standards. It's a step that, if I'm being honest, I know people in districts all across America have already done this. You've already gone through some sort of process of identifying power standards, essential standards, and you already have a bunch of things that you know work for you. But here's also what I know. I'm going to speak from my own personal experience. When I was a classroom teacher, going back 15, 20 years ago, we identified the power standards, and here's how we identified power standards. Myself, somebody else that was in my department, somebody else that taught my grade level, sat in a room, and we said, what's the most important stuff? And then we did a metaphorical arm wrestling match to figure out which things we liked to teach the most. Which ones did we think were the most important? Which was cool. I mean, it allowed us to teach to our passions and our interests. But the reality is, just because I thought it was important didn't necessarily mean that people at the state level thought it was important. The people writing the assessments thought it was important, or even the other person in my department or grade level thought it was important. It just simply meant I was sitting down and trying to prioritize what I valued. And the reality is, it didn't necessarily change anything I did in my classroom, because even before I went through this metaphorical exercise, I was already identifying the stuff that I thought was important every single day. I was already arguing for the things that I thought were the most essential. So how can we create another process that allows us to leverage the stuff I showed early on with collective teacher efficacy, allowing teachers to make the decisions that matter most, encouraging collaboration, adding to teacher clarity, student clarity, while also creating power standards, priority standards, the first step in having standards-aligned instruction and standards-based grading? Well, here's the trick. Here's the protocol that I introduce to staffs and to teachers everywhere. So one thing I want you to recognize, I want you to focus in on these two numbers, 257 and 1431. 257, what does that number represent? 257 represents the number of standards a sixth grader is expected to master in the 4 core subject areas. If you live in a state that has its standards built off of the Common Core, whether you still subscribe to the Common Core or some sort of state iteration of the Common Core, 257 represents the number of standards a student is expected to master in 6th grade. Why 6th grade? Just simply because it's smack dab in the middle, not because it's any kind of outlier. 257 standards in the 4 core of math, science, social studies, and language arts. That equates to a student being expected to master a standard every 0.7 days. What does 1431 represent? Well, that's the number of standards students are expected to master if we throw in the 3 most popular electives of music, art, and PE. Now, if you're like me, you see those numbers and you say, that is impossible, Dave. There's no way a kid can master a standard every 0.7 days, 257 standards in a year. And I say, you are absolutely correct. There is no way, especially if we're asking our students to master the standards to the level of depth that we're asking them to master them with application, analysis, synthesis, creation, evaluation. Getting students to master 257 standards in 1 year, that is absolutely staggering. I agree, Facebook user. Absolutely staggering. It's crazy. Well, the reality is that is not necessarily the expectation. Yeah, that's the number of standards that are presented to us for students to master, but the expectation is not that our students master all 257. States everywhere, including in Ohio, understand that there are some standards that are more important than others. There are some things that require us to go a little bit deeper and to make sure that our kids understand them. And there is a little formula that I can introduce to you really quickly today. This is the nugget of all nuggets. If you're a person that takes screenshots of things, this is the thing you need to take a screenshot of, because this is the secret sauce. Thinking about 257 standards, knowing that you can't teach them all. Some of us would go about this a couple different ways. Some of us would just simply say, okay, I'm just going to start plowing through and get through as many of these standards as I can in any given year. If I get through 100 of them, great. If I can't, great. And then just knowing that there are some things I won't ever get to. Some of us say, which of the standards do I like best, which is fun for you, doesn't necessarily require that our students are going to learn, quote unquote, the right stuff. But a protocol that you can use to make sure that you are focusing on the right things, allowing you to focus on the focus and identify the power standards, the priority standards, the essential standards that matter most to you, is to follow a protocol called the LED protocol. LED is an acronym, LED. Here's what I want you to do. If you've got time over break or on a weekend or with your department or grade level or PLC in the coming days, weeks, or months, here's the protocol to follow. I want you to pull out your standards for your grade level and your subject area. Literally have a paper copy of your standards in front of you. And I'm going to ask you to read through your standards 3 times. The first time you look at your standards, I want you to look at them through the L lens. L stands for leverage. Leverage means it's transferable. A standard that is leveraged means you might be a language arts teacher, but as you read this standard, you think this is a standard that might actually help a student be successful in social studies or science or math, some other department, some other subject area within your grade level. If it is a standard that you think has leverage, as you're reading through the standard on your little sheet of paper, just give it a tally mark, give it a 1 point for having leverage. If you're not sure, if you look at something and say, I think this has value to another department, another subject area, and you're not 100% sure, guess what you can do? You can go ask. Oh, yeah, you can have a conversation with somebody in a different subject area, different department. We'll talk about that later on. But go through, and if it has leverage, you give it a point. Very binary. Got it? Don't got it. Second time you read through it, I want you to focus on the E in LED. The E stands for endurance. An endurance standard is a standard that you teach in your grade level that you see as almost a prerequisite for success at another grade level later on. I don't say later on in life because if you're like me, you justify everything you teach by saying this could help you later on in life because you never know what job you're going to get. And we just teach a bunch of random things because it could help a kid later on in life when we have no idea what their lives are going to look like. But we do know what the expectations for curriculum, content standards, so on and so forth look like K-12. So we look at it through the lens of, will this help you be successful later on in school at another grade level? If you teach a standard that you believe is a prerequisite for success later on, it has endurance. Again, you give it a point. Now, I used to look at this the opposite way. I used to look at my standards and say, there are some standards that end with me. And if I don't teach it, nobody else will. They'll never get it from me. And I used to think those are the most important. It's actually the exact opposite. So if you really think about it, we're teaching some standards that we're saying a kid should be able to master by the time they're 10, 11, 12 years old, and it'll last them for the rest of their lives. If that's the case, it's not that essential for you to teach it this year. It's not that important for them to master it with you. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the standards that require endurance, meaning they're going to build on it later on. So you need to teach the foundations of it with you. Okay. So again, the first two, L and the E, very binary. Got it, don't got it. If you think it's leverage, give it a point. If you think it has endurance, you give it a point. The last piece of this in the lead protocol, the D stands for depth. Andrea, I'm glad you think this is helpful. Thank you for that. The depth on this side of the equation is going to focus on Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's, for a few super important reasons that we don't have time to unpack today. But in essence, goals, objectives are written according to Bloom's. They are outcome driven, not thinking about the thinking process that goes into it. If you think about the statistic I showed you early on with 83% of the standards written at the application level or above, this is extremely critical. I want you to look at your standards again for the third and final time. And I want you to identify what level the standard is written to, according to Bloom's. If it's a recall standard, in other words, kids just need to memorize some things, you give it 1 point. If it's an understanding standard, which means we want you to summarize things, put things in your own words, just tell me that you have a general understanding of the concept, it gets 2 points. Application is 3, analysis 4, synthesis 5, evaluation 6, creation 7, reflection 8. Some of you will notice I added a couple of layers in there. I added synthesis as a standalone. In the original Bloom's taxonomy written about 45 years ago, analysis and synthesis were put in the same compartment, even though they're two slightly different things. To analyze something means you break it down, like what we're doing right now. To synthesize something means you put it all back together again. So I'm going to ask that you actually separate those out because it's going to help you disaggregate this information. When it's all said and done, once you've gone through and you've scored your standards for leverage, endurance, and depth, I then want you to come up with your total score for each standard. What you will notice is that you have about 10 to 12 standards at every grade level and every subject that far and away surpass the points of every other standard. And what you've just done is you have just nominated your power standards. Your power standards have been selected using truly the same criteria that states and summative assessment companies use when they're creating the scoring matrix for your big, scary tests. If in your state, like in Ohio, like in Illinois, like in Michigan, like in Wisconsin, like in Georgia, like in Florida, if your big, scary test is given to kids and your scores are reported back to you in some sort of scale score, those scale scores are weighted scores, which means some standards are given more points than others. Guess what protocol they're using to determine which standards are worth more points? Ding, ding, ding. They're using the lead protocol. The lead protocol allows you to focus on the standards that matter more. That's right. These are powerful standards. They are super power standards because this also increases a lot of those other things that we were just talking about. It increases collective teacher efficacy. How so? Well, if we were to start unpacking the standards-based roadmap a little bit more, one of the things that we would talk about was really looking at creating rubrics and aligned assessments. One of the things that we've been able to do is we've been able to focus now on creating rubrics that are transferable across grade levels and across departments, where teachers now recognize they don't have to teach any of these things in isolation in the silo of their classroom, nor do they have to assess them in isolation. We've created inter-rater reliability by focusing on standards that have leverage, meaning multiple subjects benefit from this being taught. Teachers are now aligning their vocabulary, their understanding, their expectations providing greater teacher clarity by having standards that have leverage. With endurance, we're looking across grade levels now, within departments to make sure that there's commonality, teacher clarity, student clarity of expectations. We're creating that snowball effect that allows our rubrics to be aligned across grade levels. So no one teacher feels like they're on an island anymore. Instead, we're all lined up. We create these power standards that allow us to then transfer our knowledge moving forward and doing things like we never have before. See, the beautiful thing is when we're able to double down and say, let's just focus on the focus. Let's just identify the things that matter more, the things that matter most, not just because I think it's important, because we think it's important. We're actually doing what research tells us is a best practice. We're focusing on the things that John Hattie and countless others over the last 20 years have told us matters more. Collective teacher efficacy. You get teachers in a room now not arguing about what things they like to teach more than others, but they're having conversations about which standard has leverage and endurance and what is the requisite depth of a standard. Those are the conversations that now start taking place at PLCs and departments and in grade levels. You're not using assessments to say this teacher is a better teacher than that teacher. You're now looking at things to say, is this aligned with the stuff we're supposed to be focusing on? It allows you to take 257 standards and shrink it down to the most essential. You're now teaching, instead of 257 standards in a year, trying to get kids to master a standard every 0.7 days, to saying 10 to 12 standards a year for me to teach to this level of depth. Wow, I could basically teach a standard a month to this requisite depth, and my kids will show greater success. And the answer is yes. Again, this is just a snapshot of some of the work that we are doing in, I'm even going to say it, Michigan, man, and it breaks me to say this, but in the great state of Ohio. Yep, I'm even wearing a little scarlet today to represent my love for the people in Ohio. Oh, you have no idea how hard that was for me to say, but it's true. This is a small glimpse of some of that work. So if you live in Ohio, I can't wait to get back and hang out with you again and continue on with some of this work. Or maybe you're working with Chad or Ray or Katie or one of the other trainers on the Teach Better team doing this work. If you live in a state not called Ohio and you want to sit down and do some of this work with us, you can see the link at the bottom, teachbetter.com/grants. Takes you to some information where you can get a little bit more knowledge on how to generate the funds to maybe receive some of this training, or you can just reach out to me. My social media link is right there. I'm happy to connect with you and figure out a plan or path forward. Again, if you want to unpack any of this information, just reach out, connect with me or any member of the Teach Better team. This is just a short little snippet, monthly tip that we're providing. I know next month you're going to get even more value from the work that's being done. I hope this was helpful to you. The LED protocol, it's a great little way for you to focus on the focus.